And I'm wrapping up Daniel today. We haven't done a deep dive into Daniel. We've covered, we've gone over 3 different stories, and it felt like it was a good time to sort of wrap that up. And so I've got this passage from Daniel 12. I'm going to read pieces of it. I recognized in reading it, it's really complicated, and so just reading it straight out, I think, would just be unfortunate for us to have to try to figure out what exactly is going on in a public reading. So I'm going to sort of read little pieces of it. But the first half of Daniel is the stories of the faithful people, for the most part, trying to figure out what it means to be living in the midst of empire. They have their hometown, their city has been destroyed, the temple has been destroyed. They have been carried away into exile in Babylon. They are living in the midst of an empire that is that has destroyed everything that they have known, carried them off into a kind of servanthood slavery. They've been told by their prophets that this will only last 70 years. So everybody like 10 and above said, "Oh, great. So we won't actually get to see the end of this. Like, this is where we're going to end up dying." And so they're in Babylon, and they're trying to figure out, what does faithfulness look like? And so we have these stories of Daniel in a couple different places, refusing to eat the food that was given him by the king of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refusing to bow down to the golden idol and having to be thrown in the fiery furnace. Daniel, similarly, not praying the way he was supposed to pray, praying to Yahweh God and not praying to King of Babylon, and being thrown into the den of lions. So we have these stories of the people facing empire, an evil empire, and their acts of faithfulness are acts of simple resistance. They're simply saying no. They're not picking up swords. They're not fighting with anyone. They're not conspiring to take down the empire from within, even though Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego probably have that option because they have been sort of awarded high positions of authority. They are simply seeing the empire and because of their faithfulness in God, being wise enough to know when to say no. And for that to be a life-threatening posture when they say no. Then the second half of Daniel gets into these visions that are given to Daniel, which are visions of sort of the cosmic battle at work that's behind the scenes, as well as a possible future of what the future holds for these kingdoms. The kingdom of Babylon and all the kingdoms that are going to follow, they are going to eventually be destroyed. They're going to fight with each other. They're going to destroy each other. And eventually God's kingdom will prevail. In the one vision we had, we saw a rock that was carved out of the mountain, but not by human hands, coming and smashing the statue that was the representative of all the future powerful kingdoms of the world, that then grew into the mountain of the Lord, where peace reigned and God was enthroned on high. So these visions in Daniel are scary, they're violent, there's lots of fighting, but again, it's never the people of God that are doing the fighting, it's always the kingdoms and God's divine host, God's divine army that's doing this fighting. And so this is what we are seeing, and so mirroring what the people are experiencing and how they are living out simple faith of just saying no when they need to is this war that's raging. And it's this mirror of kind of giving us insight into, here's what's happening in the cosmic realm, here's what's happening with the nations, here's how God is taking care of all of it, and here's how the people are supposed to live simply and honestly and faithfully in that empire. So the second half of Daniel has all these wild visions, and in chapter 12 we sort of get the wrap up for it. In chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, it says, "At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise." This is a vision of sort of like an angel Michael, the savior, the protector of the people of Israel. "There will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then." So Michael will arise, and things are actually going to get worse. "But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. Some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever." So we have this vision that the Savior of the people will arise, things will get worse before they get better, but ultimately, those who have fallen asleep, those who are buried in the ground, those faithful who have come before, they will arise. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. This is the reward that the vision is given to Daniel, the reward for those who have been wise and faithful. They will rise to everlasting life. Others will rise to shame and everlasting contempt. This is what Daniel is seeing. In the midst of everything that's going on, in the midst of all the craziness, in the midst of the fact that Daniel has been hoping for and praying for his people to be released and to go back home, even despite all of that, God is still at work, and this promised end will come. Our craziness the last month has been softball. 4 nights a week, 2 games on 2 nights of those weeks for an entire month. On top of that, we had swimming, so we had swim practice in the mornings and then meets on Saturday mornings. So 5 days a week of lots of busyness. But I've been watching a lot of softball, and I've been appreciating even more how difficult the game really is, especially when it comes to hitting the ball. Like, it's hard enough just to hit a ball with a bat, but it's even harder with the addition of these things called balls and strikes. And somehow you have to pay attention to what pitch is going to be advantageous to you that you can kind of let go of, and what ball is going to put you deeper into which pitch is going to put you deeper in the hole of the strikes. And then on top of that, you have humans that are making the judgment call about what's a ball and a strike. Beautiful, fallible, trying their very best human beings, right? I've seen a lot of confusion by batters in the batter box. I've seen tears. I've seen bats and helmets being chucked into the dugout as these young women are trying to figure out when to swing and when not to swing. It's so hard. It takes me back to my short-lived baseball career that ended just after middle school. I was big and strong enough to hit the ball pretty hard, but only if the ball was coming right down the middle, right in the middle of the strike zone. It was really common for me to hit really well in batting practice when I knew where the pitches were going to go and the coach was giving me, easy balls to hit. And then I would get into the game and I struck out a lot because I would watch a lot of pitches go by just on the edge of the strike zone, and then giving that look of disbelief and disgust to the umpire's calls. How could they call that a strike? Later, I realized that, it kept happening regardless of the umpire. So maybe there was another common ingredient in my strikeouts than the umpires. And listen, you umpires, I feel for you. I really do. Especially at this level. Aspen, you're amazing. And I am so sorry that you have to deal with figuring out, these girls are trying so hard to pitch the ball across the plate, and so you want to give them some, confidence, and you want to say strike on at least a couple of the pitches, even if they're, way too high for what the batter considers a strike. It is really hard to deal with because you also want the batters to learn, what is a strike in a ball. Man, it is hard. My prayers have been with you. You can be glad you're done, at least for now, at least with the rec season. I don't know if you're umpiring other places, but thank you for doing it. But when I was playing, and I'm seeing it now, it's just really hard to adjust to the pitches that aren't right down the middle. I've got in my head this vision. I'm one of those people that likes to visualize, the perfect pitch and the perfect swing, and that's sort of what I get locked into and what I assume is going to come. But it rarely came. I rarely got a pitch right down the middle, and I just never learned how to adjust to the pitches that weren't perfect, the pitches that were on the edges, the pitches that were just a little high or just a little low. And this is, I think, a major point of the book of Daniel. How do we live faithful lives when the pitches just aren't coming down right down the middle? How do we live faithful lives when the umpire's strike zone is all over the place? How do we live when our circumstances are not ideal, when life doesn't seem fair, when there's too much pain or fear or injustice? Daniel is a version of this question in this story. We see the people of Israel experiencing the worst of empire, and we see people experiencing the most seductive of empire. But what I find fascinating as I was thinking about Daniel in this story is that Daniel is just a microcosm of this whole story. This whole story that we have is a crazy strike zone. We have the ideal situation on pages 1 and 2. That's it. 1 and 2, we have the ideal situation, and then the rest of the story is a hot mess. By the end of page 3, the ideal situation, the ideal relationships have been strained and broken. And the rest of the story is all about life being far less than ideal. Abraham's family is called and eventually settles in the promised land, but is met with all sorts of resistance from the outside and poor decisions on the inside. Within just a couple generations of Abraham, that family is moving from the land that was promised them to move to Egypt because of famine. And then multiple generations in, they find themselves enslaved in Egypt. After being freed from Egypt, the people are on their way back. The people are traveling back to the promised land, but the travel itself is so difficult that they actually want to go back to Egypt, because at least that was better in their mind. Once the people make it to the promised land, they face internal and external challenges. They face threats from the outside. They go through generation after generation of doing evil, and then God calling a judge to kind of help get them in line, and then they do evil again, and then they get brought back in line by a judge. They start to think, well, maybe the ideal situation is a king like the other nations around us. They say a king would be a nice, easy pitch right down the middle. And if we get that, we're going to hit it out of the park. And God says, No, you won't. You know what happens when you get a king? You get someone who builds a huge army and hoards all the resources and is unfair to the people and is drunk with power. If you get this pitch down the middle, you are going to whiff big time. And the people say, just bring it down the middle. Just give it to us. We got this. And guess what happens? They get their king. And they whiff big time. And exactly what God warns about happens. And we hear stories of the kings who hoard the wealth, who take all of the young women as their wives, who put all their boys into military service. The situation is far from ideal. Eventually, the kingdom breaks in half. We've got Israel in the north and Judah in the south, led by a mixture of different kinds of kings. And eventually, both of those kingdoms are destroyed and carried away into exile. And so we have the people of Judah taken away into Babylon, where we have our stories of Daniel. And we hear this confusion by the people and the frustration about living out their faith under these awful circumstances in Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? The people couldn't make sense of it. How in the world can we live our lives of faith? How can we sing our songs of faith? How can we worship and praise if we're not in the promised land? How can we do that? We had that same confusion just a number of years ago when we weren't meeting inside this building for worship. And we had to figure out, what does that mean? How in the world can we have church if we're not here in this building at 401 18th Avenue? That doesn't make any sense. We had to work through that confusion and figure out, what does faithfulness mean if the stars aren't all aligned, if the pitches aren't coming right down the middle? What does faithfulness look like? But that's what we have in the scriptures, is the stories of faithfulness that are taking place right in the midst of these less than ideal circumstances. The faithful people in the Bible aren't hitting home runs on pitches right down the middle of the plate. They're doing their best just to stick their bat out there and hit the curveball that's falling to the bottom edge of the strike zone. They're just doing whatever they can in the moment to try to put the ball in play, because they know they're not going to get a pitch right down the middle. Shiphrah and Puah are the midwives in Egypt who are put in the terrible position of being ordered to kill the newborn Israelite babies in Egypt. And they don't know what to do exactly, but they choose to stick their bat out there and to put something in play. They spare the lives of the Israelite children, and they lie about it, telling their superiors they have their babies way faster than we can even get there to help them out and to be there when they are born. They put their lives in grave risk, just trying to do something in a really awful and less than ideal situation. Ruth and Naomi experience unspeakable loss, losing husbands and brothers and sons, trying to figure out what to do. Naomi decides to go back to her people and tells Ruth, just stay with your people. And Ruth says, no, I am committed to you. I will be with you through this. In an awful situation, Ruth commits to being with Naomi, to finding a way to be faithful to Naomi, to the commitments she's made, to entrusting her own life to Naomi's people and their God. So she moves back with Naomi to a foreign land, completely unsure of what her future will hold. It makes me wonder if sometimes perfect situations are actually hindrances to faithfulness. When we have everything lined up just right, does that actually make it harder to be faithful sometimes? God warns about this. He says in Deuteronomy, as the people are traveling and eventually making it to the promised land, he says, when you make it to the promised land and are healthy and wealthy and happy, don't forget me. Don't forget God. Because when you make it to the land and you are healthy and wealthy and happy, you will be tempted to say, hey, look at all the wealth that we've built for ourselves. Look at how awesome we are. When you are healthy and wealthy and happy and secure, you will be that much more tempted to forget God and rely on your own strength, your own wisdom, your own smarts. And yet, it's so common for us to convince ourselves that we'll be able to live more faithful lives once our life smooths out a little bit. So we say to ourselves things like, well, once I have a little more money and feel a little bit more financially secure, then I'll be able to give. Then I'll be able to be generous. Or we say, once my schedule finally calms down, then I'll find time for prayer. It won't be that long. I can see it on the horizon. Eventually, things will calm down. My schedule will be freer, and then I'll be able to make time for prayer. I will be able to forgive, but only if that person comes to me, admits what they did, and shows true remorse. Then I'll be able to forgive. I can forgive. I'm happy to forgive. Please, I want to forgive. As long as that person comes to me, admits what they did, and shows proper remorse. I need that pitch right down the middle so that I can forgive, but once that happens, I will do it. These are all thoughts that many of us have had. These are all reasonable thoughts. They make sense. But we miss the point of Daniel, and we miss the point of the whole scriptures, which is that it will be exceedingly rare for us to have things line up perfectly. It is incredibly uncommon for the pitch to come right down the middle. Living faithfully is about the hard but rewarding work of figuring out how to follow Jesus and be the people God intends us to be, precisely in the middle of the less than ideal circumstances. That's when faith actually matters. That's when faith makes a difference in our lives and in the world around us. It was the simple and courageous acts of resistance by Daniel and his friends that eventually revealed the power of Yahweh God to the kings of Babylon. In each of those stories, in each of those little vignettes of Daniel or of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it was when they were put into an unthinkable position and they had to figure out, what does faithfulness look like in this really difficult situation? That's when the power of God was revealed. And at the end of each one of those stories, the Babylonian king made some ridiculous comment about how from now on, everybody should serve Yahweh God, and those that don't will be pulled limb from limb and their houses burned and whatever, right? Like that's the "I don't think he gets it" line from our drama. But after each one of those, that's when, or in the midst of those stories, that's when the power of God was really revealed. In simple acts of faithfulness, of resistance, in the midst of the difficult times. So today, that is the act of patience with someone when you're already on your last nerve. It is the kindness that you show specifically to the person who is consistently rude to you. Today, it's continuing to pray even when you're not quite sure if God's actually listening. Today, it's looking at all the options to keep yourselves busy and add to your busy schedules, and prioritizing time with your family and your faith community. Faithfulness is never about waiting until everything is lined up right. Faithfulness is about seizing the moment, every moment, big or small, to honor God, especially when things aren't going exactly as you had hoped. This was Daniel's posture all along. He prayed for his people to be free to return to their homeland. Earlier in the book, when Daniel starts to receive these visions, it says he was praying and fasting for 3 weeks before he got any of this vision of promise. For 3 weeks, he was praying and fasting. I think that the people being returned to their homeland is the one thing that he wanted most. But as far as we know, he never actually saw that future come to pass. He saw a vision with a promise, but he never actually saw it. But because he faithfully followed God through those circumstances, he faithfully followed God under the shadow of the empire, he was left with a promise and a word from God. And that's at the end of Daniel chapter 12. There's a promise in verses 5 through 12 in which Daniel's asking sort of, okay, when is this all going to take place? And the messenger throws out some numbers that don't really make sense and kind of give us the sense that maybe the messenger's trying intentionally to be obtuse, trying intentionally to be sort of general and vague, to reiterate that this is simply about trust. We're not going to know the exact date and time. And the last line of Daniel, the last line is this message from the messenger, from the angel to Daniel. And this is his message, which I will try to get through without crying, but I can't make any promises. Nope, can't do it. Okay. As for you, Daniel, go your way till the end. Go on your way till the end. You will rest. You will rest. And at the end of the days, you will rise, and you will receive your inheritance. This is God's word of comfort for Daniel. And I hope it is a word that we can receive both now and at the end of our days. When it feels like we can't figure out why the world is such a mess, we can't figure out why life won't ever just throw us that pitch right down the middle, and we have been slowly and patiently trying our best to stick the bat out there, to put something in play. And like a good softball player or a baseball player, we're really only making contact a third of the time at most. When we have grace with ourselves to forgive ourselves and to recognize that the pitches are not coming down the middle. If we didn't wait for things to work out, but if we continued to live our faithful lives in this less than ideal world, I hope we can receive this promise. As for you, Go on your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days, you will rise to receive your inheritance. May it be so for all of us. Amen.